If you like 2D shooters as much as I do, you probably know about Milestone. Not the Italian racing game developer, but the Japanese company Milestone that was active from the mid-2000s. This Milestone was made up mostly of ex-Compile employees and made a name for themselves as a developer of genre-bending 2D shooting games, mostly on the Naomi arcade hardware. In an era when the gaming market was flooded with derivative 3D action-adventure games and nearly devoid of 2D console titles, Milestone's shooters were a beacon of light, delivering hyper-challenging action alongside sublime imagery that quickly built a cult following. Milestone was active for just under 10 years and closed under shady circumstances, but the 5 shooters they left behind are a testament to creativity and will always be remembered fondly for giving 2D game lovers something to look forward to. In fact, their games are just as technologically impressive and fun to play now as they were when they were new. So in this episode, let's take an up-close look at all 5 of Milestone's shooters and see what makes each one so unique. Chaos Field was Milestone's first game, and what a way to break into the industry. Released in 2004, Chaos Field is a boss rush. The game consists of 5 levels with 3 bosses each and not one single minor enemy in between. Sound too simple? I can assure you that after giving it a go, Chaos Field will convince you this is a perfectly legitimate blueprint for a shooter. The game system revolves around the existence of 2 different universes called fields, which you can switch between whenever you want, the Order Field and the Chaos Field. While in the Order Field, the enemy bullet patterns are relatively tame. Changing to the Chaos Field gives your ship more firepower, but also makes enemy bullet patterns significantly more difficult. There's a time limit on every boss, so you'll definitely want to be in the Chaos Field whenever possible, but you'll need to figure out which boss patterns you can deal with and which are just too overbearing in their harder form. There are 3 ships to choose from, each with their own pilot and weapon type. The first character has a standard shot, the second has a lock-on laser, and the third has a short-range cannon. In addition to your regular weapon, you also have a sword which cancels out certain types of bullets, and a special force field you can use to hide from bullets for a few seconds. While the sword is nice, it won't do much damage to the enemy, so if you're constantly using it, you probably won't be able to kill the boss within the time limit. The finely tuned balance between the weapons you have at your disposal and the challenge of the bosses is revealing of the experience the developers brought with them from their time working at Compile. As you can see, Chaos Field sticks to a very dark color palette, and the enemy design is completely mechanical and inorganic, which is complemented perfectly by the heavy, industrial-sounding techno tracks that go with it. Even without any in-game story, Chaos Field is never lacking in atmosphere. Milestone's follow-up to the critically acclaimed Chaos Field was Rattle G, a clumsy Japanese abbreviation for radio allergy. If Chaos Field was an experimental take on 2D shooters, then Rattle G damn near breaks the genre. It was the first shooting game ever to use cel-shaded graphics, and thus has a completely different look from their previous game. Rattle G is cute and cartoony, with you traversing Japanese towns and parks, although something is clearly amiss. Actually, the word Milestone used to describe Rattle G, Denpake, originally referred to crazy tinfoil-wearing conspiracy theorists. The soundtrack is also a very appropriate mix of techno-pop and electronica, and really solidified Milestone's sound team, Ko Hayashi and Daisuke Nagata, as a tour de force of the game music world. In Rattle G, your ship has a standard shot and a sword, but the similarities to Chaos Field end there. You can now also put up a shield if you stop attacking, and most importantly, you have a bomb-like function called the Absonet, which is probably a combination of absorb and network. While this bomb doesn't do damage to enemies, you're invincible while it's activated, and it multiplies your score if you kill enemies during this time. This is where Rattle G begins to step outside the parameters of a shooter and evolve into something else. The trick to the game is using the Absonet while there are enough enemies and bullets on screen such that, if you kill everything quickly enough, you can refill the meter before the Absonet effect wears off, effectively allowing you continued invincibility. Since the sword does more damage than the standard shot, you'll find yourself kamikazeing into enemies much more often than carefully avoiding bullets. It's a hectic and extremely satisfying play mechanic, and to this day is one of the most unique takes on the shooter genre to ever grace gaming. One last thing to note about Radilgy is the subliminal messages. The game has a weird setting to begin with, as your screen looks like that of a cell phone with you getting text messages and even spam mail. In between levels, you'll get random images that only appear for a brief moment and are meant to reveal more about the game world and your character. Sadly, these screens really are only visible for tenths of a second, which just isn't long enough for a non-native speaker to read, so their meaning is lost even on me. Even so, it adds atmosphere to the game experience beyond the actual play mechanics and shows the developers were really getting experimental. Milestone's third shooter was Kurosu, which means crow in Japanese. Clearly, this is supposed to refer to your ship. Kurosu keeps the same attack system as Rattle G. You have a shot, sword, and shield, an Absinet-like special attack called DFS that makes you invincible for a few seconds. And yet somehow it manages to feel completely different from its predecessor. This is because in Kurosu, you level up your weapons depending on how often you use them. Like Rattle G, you can recharge the DFS meter while you have it in use if you're quick on the draw, and players will quickly realize the sword is much stronger than the regular shot, so it has a tendency to get powered up the most. Here's the real trick. You've got to power up the shield. The shield can also be used to damage enemies, and once it gets powered up to a certain level, it will start reflecting bullets back towards the screen, protecting you from the huge walls of bullets the bosses toss at you. Different enemy types are easier to kill with different weapons, and once you learn this, you'll probably try to kill the weaker enemies with the shield whenever possible. Kurosu also uses cel-shaded graphics and has a somber, purposefully minimalist art style that paints a very odd universe. Once again, the soundtrack is beyond perfect. Still electronica, but this time implementing some hard drum and bass rhythms under surprisingly melodic compositions. It has to be heard to be understood. As for the story, it's so abstract, I don't even know that it's worth summarizing here. All I can say is, you're a girl on a post-apocalyptic Earth who's taken to the sky in search of God's blood. Beating the standard game of Kurosu is relatively easy, but getting to the true last boss and seeing the good ending is much more difficult. Not only will you have to beat the 5 standard bosses within a time limit, but you also have to find a special milestone logo hidden in each stage. These logos appear by using the right weapon in the right spot, which I have no idea how a person could find on their own without a guide. Even if you don't go for the good ending, playing Kurosu is a gaming experience like no other. After Kurosu, Milestone released Velo in 2008, which was ported to the Nintendo Wii later that year. Velo is an abbreviation of Illmatic Envelope, and in case the name doesn't give it away, this game is weird. Just take a look at the artwork. The level backgrounds are full of broken watches, staplers, and God knows what else. These levels are what would happen if you threw the clothes of a girl on the streets of Harajuku into an illustration program. The boss character design in particular is so twisted that it's nothing short of revolutionary. As an example, I present you with the Living Monitor System, a demonic cartoon pile of equipment come to life with one purpose: to take your soul. The music also returns to a more playful, synth-pop style to match the hyper-colorful backdrops. Like Kurosu, your weapons in Velo will power up depending on how often you use them. You still have an attack that makes you invincible for a couple seconds and increases the weapon points you receive while it's activated, but the sword has been replaced by 2 sub-weapons called dolls. These helpers can be detached from your ship and placed anywhere on the screen, and then moved in tandem with your ship. Pressing the button usually used for the sword will make them spin, during which time they'll damage enemies. And just as in Kurosu, it's really important to get your shield powered up so you can reflect the avalanches of bullets you'll be dealing with. But where Velo differs most from Milestone's previous games is the addition of secret rooms. Every level is chock full of doors that will take you to a special area where you have a challenge to complete. Either kill all the enemies that appear, or kill a simple boss. If you complete the room perfectly, you'll get a key, or sometimes a larger key which is worth 5 small ones. You'll need 50 of these keys to access the true final boss, and let me tell you, this is not an easy task. Thankfully, there's a special mode that lets you only play the secret rooms, so you can practice them individually without having to play through the whole game again and again. Not everyone appreciated the idea of these secret rooms. It results in start and stop gameplay which doesn't appeal to all gamers, and accordingly Velo is the least sought after milestone shooter. But there is no denying the fact that Velo is a testament to Untamed's creative spirit. Milestone's final shooting game was Rattle G Noir, and it's a sequel to Rattle G. The level design and bosses are new, but the gameplay system is effectively the same. If you've played Rattle G in depth, then you'll know what to expect from Rattle G Noir. I don't mean to make it sound like they didn't put effort into this game. Of course it's an excellent shooter with all the excitement and franticness of the first game. It just isn't quite as revolutionary as all the other shooters they made. It's still a worthy addition to any shooting collection. Milestone's games had a very passionate fan base, and they clearly put their hearts into their work, so you might wonder why they disbanded. Well, in 2013 the president was arrested for taking illicit investments for another company he owned, and their website and social media accounts quickly disappeared. That was a devastating blow to gamers. But I have good news. I just learned that the company that acquired the rights to Milestone's games is working on another sequel to Rattle G, codenamed Rattle G S. And from everything I've seen, it's going to be a totally original game and not a port or a remake. Now that is super exciting. It's really nice to be able to end a video on a high note like this. I'll put the link to the article that talks about Rattle GS down in the video description. It's in Japanese, but you can see one in-game screenshot. That should be more than enough to encourage any retro gamer that there are good things on the horizon. Thanks for checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next week.